So today we're going to be looking at some word problems. All week we have worked on looking at subtracting and adding numbers, but they haven't been in the context of word problems. So today our learning target is I can determine whether to find an estimate or an exact answer in a single step word problem. You know you've done this when you've restated the problem in your own words and you've used your organizer to help you think. So we're going to be looking in context today. We're not actually solving today. There is not really going to be any actual solving today. We're just looking at word problems and we're really making two decisions. Decision number one is, are we finding an estimate or are we finding an exact answer, and how do we know? And then the second part will be, are we adding or subtracting and how do we know? And we have a little organizer to help us with that. So, and those are the two questions. So when you think about solving a problem, these are like two questions to ask yourself. Are we finding an exact answer or an estimate? How do you know? What operation are you using? And how do you know? So those are kind of the first two questions that should come in your mind after you read a word problem. So what is this problem saying? Rachel has $385 in her bank account. Jane has $291 in her bank account. About how much money would they have if they combined their funds? So remember, I'm going to go back. Our two questions say, are we finding an exact answer, an estimate, and how do we know? And what operation are we using, and how do we know? So I know that when I look back in this problem, I see this word, and this word is about. And about is a key word. It actually helps me to realize that I am finding an estimate. I don't have to find an exact answer in this problem. I know that an estimate is acceptable. I only need to know about how much money they have. I don't need to know exactly how much money they have together. So when I start to think about the problem and I start to think about my second part, which is, am I adding or subtracting? I kind of already asked myself, okay, can I retell the story? What's the question that's being asked? And what do I already know? So this is my retell of the story. So Rachel and Jane each have some money, and they want to know how much money they would have if they put their money together. So that is a retell of the story in my own words. That goes back to our success criteria. Okay. And if you look here, this is where the question is, how much would they have if they combine their money? So we're looking at if we put their money together. So what do I already know? I know how much money Rachel has, and I know how much money Jane has. So it tells us how much money Rachel has and also how much money Jane has. So we know a lot, and there's still something we don't know. So are we adding or subtracting, and how do we know? Well, I like to put this in what I call a part-whole model, which means that I'm taking the parts that I know and I'm placing them in a model. So I know that the part here, this represents Rachel's money, and this part over here represents Jane's money. And the question is saying, how much would they have if they combined their money? So I don't know the whole. I know this part and I know this part. So I'm asking myself, what would I do to find out how much they have all together? And that's what's missing, is the whole. So in this question, when you know both parts and you don't know the whole, this is an addition problem. You're adding this part and this part together to figure out what is this whole part, this whole amount. So we need to estimate the numbers and then add them to find about how much they would have together. So we know that we needed to estimate because the word said about. The word about tells us we're estimating. And we also know we're adding because we know both parts, but we don't know the whole. So let's go back to our success criteria. Did we restate the problem in our own words, and did we use our organizer to help us think? Yes, we did. We knew we were finding an estimate, and we also knew that we were adding. So let's go to a new problem. Okay, and remember, these are the two questions. Keep these questions in your mind. Are we finding an exact answer, an estimate? How do you know? And what operation are we using? We're going to go back and use that organizer to help us think. So what is this problem saying? Rachel and Jane have $676 together. Rachel has $385. How much money does Jane have? Well, this problem reminds me of the last problem. There's a lot of the same names, some different data, so we have to really kind of pick it apart. So our first question is, are we finding an exact answer or an estimate? And does this problem say about? Is it asking like about how much money does Jane have? Or is it saying, I need to know how much money that Jane has? Well, in this problem, since it doesn't say about, since it doesn't tell us that we need to be estimating, we're finding an exact answer here. Okay, so again, we're going to start to think about the problem. We're going to retell the story in our own words. What's the question and what do I already know? Well, we know that in my words that Rachel and Jane have $676 together, and we only know what Rachel has. So that's kind of the way that I would put it in my own words. The question is, how much does Jane have? Well, what do I know? I know the total, and I know what Rachel has. So when I start to think about my part-whole model, I'm starting to think about where these numbers would go. So are we adding or subtracting, and how do we know? Well, here's our part-whole model. And I know that I'm putting in, I know this represents Rachel's money, and I know the total. I know the total of both of their, the money that's in both of their accounts. So I know Rachel's money. I don't know this part. I'm missing this part. I know this whole. I know this part. So what do you do when you know a whole and you're only missing a part? You know this part, you know the whole. So to find a missing part, we subtract. So we know the total and we subtract to find the missing part. So in this problem, when we go back, Rachel and Jane have $676. Rachel has $385. How much money does Jane have? Well, let's go back and answer our two questions. Are we finding an exact answer, an estimate? Well, we know we're finding an exact answer. And then we know we're subtracting because of our part-whole model. So let's go back and revisit our learning target. Did we hit our learning target today? Our learning target was I can determine whether to find an estimate or an exact answer in a single-step word problem. You'll know you've done it when you've restated the problem in your own words and used the organizer to help us think. So we definitely have hit our learning target today, and we are going to be working more with the way of thinking as we start thinking about word problems today.